Hello, welcome to Curzon Home Cinema. I'm Jason Solomons, coming to you from London. I'm a presenter and broadcaster. I write to the New European newspaper and I broadcast on the BBC. And today I'm coming to you from my top of my house because that's where this very special edition of Curzon Living Room is coming to you from. It's an ongoing season of Q&A events. Today I'm in conversation with author and broadcaster Martin Goldsmith. His film Winter Journey you'll have just seen, a fantastic film. It's based on his book, of course, and it's based on the story of his family. So we're delighted to have him with us. Today's event is part of the UK Jewish Film Festival 2020, and it comes in partnership with the Association of Jewish Refugees, as well as the Goethe Institute, and it's sponsored by Fiona and Peter Needleman. So we thank them very much indeed for us being able to put this on and bring it to you. So Martin, welcome. How lovely to see you.
How lovely to see you. How lovely to be virtually in London, my favorite city in the world.
Can I ask where you are, just to get us a bit of a geography on
I'm
you?
in my home in Maryland, just north of Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow. Well, at the moment, the center of the universe, you could say, in some kind of way.
Either the center or way off on the edge of the universe. It's hard to tell sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. We go from that turmoil to a different turmoil, and your beautiful film Winter Journey, in which you feature, we hear your voice, we don't see your face, so it's lovely to put a face to that voice that we've been listening to in
this
that
is it,
movie.
I'm afraid.
We do see Bruno Ganz, however. This is a fantastic performance from an extraordinary actor. His final performance, I believe, is that right?
Exactly correct. We shot the scenes in Tucson, Arizona, where my parents had retired to, in January of 2018. And then we still had a few things that had to be shot, or recorded, actually, those telephone calls that you hear throughout the film. And later that summer, Bruno Ganz went to Salzburg, Austria, to take part in the annual Salzburg Festival. And he was taken ill and rushed back to his home in Zurich. Unfortunately, Anders Ostergaard, the director of Winter Journey, he and his sound crew went to Bruno's house and recorded those telephone calls, his end of the phone calls. He was determined to finish work on the film. That was in late September, early October of 2018, and in February of 2019, Bruno died, alas. But luckily, he did live long enough to finish Winter Journey, which, as you say, stands as his very last film.
Did he get to see the film?
I don't believe so, no, he did not.
Which is a huge shame, because I think when you know something like this, that it's his final film, his final performance, it lends it a certain gravitas, a certain melancholy, and it's certainly there in the character he was playing. And there's a, you know, it's called a winter journey. There's a farewell to it. It seems, probably, I don't know if that was intended in some way, or
I'm not sure it was, but there is a certain irony. For most people, I would imagine, the name Bruno Ganz evokes the role of Adolf Hitler, which he did so amazingly in the film Downfall about a dozen years ago. So he's best known for playing Hitler, and yet, ironically, his final role is that of a Holocaust survivor, my father.
Yeah, it is an ultimate irony, and in some way made me feel very, very proud of knowing that. Did you know that in the iconography, when you cast Bruno Ganz, you know you're sort of casting, as you say, someone who's synonymous with Hitler? Did you toy with that? Did you have a sort of a knowledge of that, a sly bit of casting?
Well, it was not up to me, the casting. It was Anders Ostergaard who made the call. I was absolutely thrilled to find out that Bruno chose to do the film. He apparently, got the script from his manager, and within just a day or so, got in touch with Anders saying he'd love to do it.
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's a fantastic part. I guess we talk about Bruno Ganz. He dominates the film so much, but you're in it too. You know, you're the. Did you play opposite him? How was the technique of that? We'd have all seen it. When I was wondering, is there going to be a close up on you? Is there going to be a reverse, and we're going to suddenly see your face? Or did you do it as a series of conversations? Were you on set with him? How did it work?
Yeah, the conceit of the film is that for the most part it's sort of home movies shot by Martin Goldsmith as he talks to his father George Goldsmith, and then of course there are archive material woven in and some very, to my mind, clever green screen technique moments when you see the young actor playing my father as a young man walking into Gestapo headquarters and walking up the stairs in Gestapo headquarters when in fact he's climbing up a rickety flight of stairs that were nailed together by the crew of Honor's companions. So the original plan was to cast an American actor living in Berlin as Martin Goldsmith and have me be the narrator. But when that was done, when we shot a few scenes, Honors decided that it was a bit confusing having two Martin Goldsmiths. So to my great pleasure, rather than having Harvey do the voiceovers for me, he had me play myself. So that was quite gratifying, of course.
Well, it was. I mean, it's very moving as well. I mean, you wrote the book in the first place. We should say An Inextinguishable Symphony, which is a story of music and love in Nazi Germany. That was how different. I haven't read the book. Do excuse me. But how different? I mean, they must be very different. Your film here is such a filmic exercise. You know, it plays with image and sound and memory and archive. A book can't possibly do that, or can it?
Well, it's quite in its way. It's a very faithful recreation of the book. The book, of course, is, well, it's about 380 pages, and not everything can be covered in a film, which is often the case. The film, as I say, is quite faithful to the book, which is about my parents and their experiences playing in this all-Jewish orchestra in Nazi Germany, the Jüdische Kulturbund, which came about after very shortly after Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January of 1933, the Nazis began kicking Jewish artists out of the roster of German orchestras, theater companies, opera companies. So by the spring of 1933, there were all these unemployed Jewish artists who came together under the auspices of a man named Kurt Singer to form this Kulturbund, this cultural association, figuring that if they couldn't make art for their fellow Germans, they could make art for their fellow German Jews. It was very much a restricted organization. To be a member of the Kulturbund, to be an actor or a singer or a violinist, or to take tickets at the box office, to clean the lavatories, to do anything having to do with the Kulturbund, you had to be Jewish, and only Jews were allowed to attend Kulturbund performances. So it was very much a restricted organization, but it was a first-rate group of artists, many of whom had been at the very top of their profession in German theaters and orchestras.
I think it's an extraordinary story that, by the way, of course, I should have pointed out, not just me asking the question tonight, it is a Q&A. So you, the audience, wherever you are in the world on YouTube, please feel free to ask questions. You just tweet your question, hashtag Curzon Living Room on the YouTube, or get in touch via YouTube. But it's the hashtag on Twitter is Curzon Living Room. So tweet your questions to us and I shall put them to Martin. But in the meantime, it's my turn. So this story of the Jewish Kulturbund, I didn't know it. I have to say, how I mean, obviously it was quite well known, as you say. It was quite a lot of Jews involved in 1933 to quite a long time. But it's a story I've never seen used in any sort of mainstream dramas. Did you discover it for yourself, or do you always know about it?
I knew from a young age that my parents played in, quote, an all-Jewish orchestra in Nazi Germany, but I didn't know any of the details. When you say, Jason, that you don't know very much about the Kulturbund, virtually nobody does. But it was really an extraordinary organization. Artistically, it was first rate. The first time the Verdi's opera Nabucco was performed in Germany, it was a Kulturbund production. The first time that Luigi Pirandello's play, Six Characters in Search of an Author, was produced in Germany, it was a Kulturbund production. They had absolutely first-rate artists, but the whole thing was not only encouraged by the Nazis, it was sort of front and center in Joseph Goebbels' Ministry for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. The Kulturbund was used by the Nazis as a way to deflect criticism of their treatment of the Jews, such as that criticism was. Goebbels could say, well, look, the Jews have their own orchestra, their own opera company. All these stories you've heard of our treating them badly are just propaganda, fake news, if you will. But the Kulturbund lasted from 1933 until 1941, when by that time the Germans were at war with the world, and the Kulturbund was no longer necessary and useful as a propaganda tool. Luckily, my parents got out quite literally at the last minute. The Kulturbund was dissolved in September of 1941. My parents got out in June of 41.
I mean, the story of your parents' escape is almost worth a movie in itself. This train journey down through France to Spain to Lisbon and then over to New York. In fact, you do it quite quickly, very movingly in the film. Did they talk about this escape? It seems to me that many of these conversations you have in the film and had in the book, well, you were having them for the first time.
Well, yes, my parents were very similar to others of their generation, as I understand it. They did not want to talk about anything having to do with what happened. My older brother once asked my father, all of our friends have uncles and aunts and grandparents. They go visiting at Thanksgiving and Christmas. How come we don't have aunts and uncles and grandparents? My father thought for a moment and said, they died in the war. That was the extent of his explanation. So we never really talked about it. It wasn't until I was in my early 40s that I began asking questions that led to my writing the book. And many of those conversations are reproduced in the film. I'm very proud of the fact that I've been given a co-screenwriter's credit for the film. But so much of my screenwriting was actually just writing down verbatim the conversations that my father and I had, and which Bruno just does so brilliantly.
Yeah, there's a question tweeted in at the hashtag Curzon Living Room from Jen in Peckham, which is in South London here, Martin. So from all the way to you in Maryland, how did you feel hearing your father's words spoken again by Bruno Ganz?
Well, the most extraordinary thing, Jason, when I met Bruno in Tucson, Arizona, I expected him to sort of take me by the sleeve and lead me aside and say, now, Martin, tell me everything you can tell me about your father, his physical characteristics, any phrases he might have, the way he walked, the way he talked. In fact, he wanted nothing to do with any of that. He just used the script and his genius as an actor to create the character of George Goldsmith. And even though he and I never spoke, it was eerie how many times he would speak the words that my father spoke to me in the exact cadences of my father. There's a scene that many people will remember in the film where my father tells me about the landlord of the little apartment where my mother and father lived in Berlin, a man by the name of Adolf Cohen. Adolf Cohen used to keep a suitcase by the door, and my father asked him about that, and Adolf Cohen said, well, I want to have something to take with me when the Gestapo comes for me. And my father said, what are you talking about? And Adolf Cohen said, haven't you heard? Don't you know we're all going to be burned? And my father said, oh, come on, those are just rumors, fairy tales. And I wrote that down because that was exactly what my father had said to me. And every time I see that scene in the film, I recognize that Bruno Ganz sounds exactly like my father. He emphasized the same words. He sort of, tilted his head in the same way. I have no idea how he did it, except that he was a genius actor.
Well, maybe the writing's there for him and the cadence is there. The interesting thing for me watching the film is how they wove the archive in and found stuff. I mean, you couldn't tell where reconstruction was or if it was all archive. They putting the dialogue in there, an extraordinary sort of act of research in a way to find footage of what you were talking about. How difficult was that? I mean, I know you weren't the director, but I'll ask you to speak for Anders in that. So what amount of footage is available, and where do they dig for it? And presumably some of it's quite difficult to find, and almost quite delicate in terms of what they find.
Exactly. Very fortunately for me for writing the book, and then for Anders for making the film, is that a museum in Berlin called the Akademie der Künste actually mounted an exhibition about the Kulturbund back in the mid-90s. So in the late 90s, when I first started doing my research, I literally walked in off the street to the Akademie der Künste and said, my parents were part of this organization that you had featured. Is there anything you can show me? And they were very, very friendly. They brought me to their archives, and there were just dozens of photographs, including some that included my parents, some of which I've included in the book. And then Anders and his wife, Erzsébet, visited the Akademie der Künste and went through other parts of their archives and found a recently discovered trove of Kulturbund material in another part of Berlin. So yes, it took them literally weeks and weeks and weeks of combing through materials and deciding what to use and what not to use. And I agree with you. I think Anders was especially clever in the way he would often bring photographs to life and use that green screen technique I mentioned earlier. I think technically it's a wonder to watch.
Yes, I've got a question from Josh via the YouTube feed. Hi, Josh. He says he thinks the format of the film, part documentary, part reenactment, part archival, was incredible and very original. Can you tell him something that you just started there, more about why the director chose this approach, how he found that way of telling your story? Because it is highly original, Josh. I think you're absolutely right.
Anders likes to use what I think in the publishing world is referred to as narrative nonfiction, which is to say everything is nonfiction, everything is true to life. But Anders likes to bring it alive just a bit by having conversations. For instance, when he was suggesting to me that he wanted to make a film of The Inextinguishable Symphony, he gave me a DVD of his earlier film called 1989, which is all about the fall of the wall in that tumultuous year of 1989. And one of the signal events in the history of that year was when East German President Erich Honecker flew to Moscow to speak with Mikhail Gorbachev. And Gorbachev told him, if anything happens at the wall, unlike what we did in Czechoslovakia in 1968, we are not going to be sending any tanks into East Germany. So that was the moment, actually, that the wall started coming down. In his film, 1989, Anders cast two actors to play Honecker and Gorbachev, and essentially made up a conversation, but it led to the denouement of what Gorbachev told Honecker what the policy was going to be. So you were able to follow along, but in a more human way, perhaps, than had there just been, a crawl on screen saying Gorbachev made this statement to Honecker. So he enjoys working in that way, bringing scenes to life, bringing history to life. So he's operated in that way before. But I think I agree with Josh. I think he did really a splendid job in Winter Journey.
It's interesting when you stick to the end of the film and you watch the credits that I didn't realize until then it's actually a German film, isn't it? Would you call it a German film rather than a US? If Hollywood had made it, it would be a rather different timbre, it'd be a different story. But because you've got Bruno Ganz there, because the German production team, it comes from their side, it seems to me. And it took me a while to realize that, but I think it's a very interesting angle.
Well, it's actually a co-production between, there's a German producer and a Danish producer. That's I suppose, how Anders, who is a Dane, became attached to the project, as they say in Hollywood. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. If it were done in Hollywood, it would be definitely different. I think certain things would have been emphasized. And Anders takes, I think, a very European look at the story. And the German producers were very enthusiastic and supportive.
Don't let me stop you, by the way, if Hollywood does come going, where there's a big love story here with the Holocaust and violins and this escape. I think there's a great story there, and I think there's an Oscar in it for you if you want to sell it.
I must say, Jason, I have to confess, I love what Anders did with Winter Journey, but it is a 90-minute documentary film. I do think that the story that I tell in the book could be the basis for a great feature film or one of those 13-part episodes on Netflix or something like that. So,
oh, you're upselling now. You're going 13
well,
parts on Netflix.
No, think big, as they say.
But you can see, I don't know who would play your father, but you can see Meryl Streep. You can see the whole Sophie's Choice thing coming in here. I can just see it. It's a marvelous with the music and everything.
The head of the Kulturbund was a man named Kurt Singer, who was had very, very iron-willed and everybody was a bit afraid of him. I've always thought that Kenneth Branagh could be a great Kurt Singer. I think he has that sort of gravitas,
yeah,
artistic flair that Kurt Singer had.
We'll get it out to him. Talking of the book and obviously the script that came from it, Simone is in London, and she says she hasn't read the book before seeing the film, but will now seek the book out. She wants to ask, what authors inspired your own writing, Martin?
That's an excellent question, and I have to say that I've actually thought about that, and they include writers I enjoyed when I was much younger, and writers that I keep returning to. I have been told that sometimes my editors have told me that some of my sentences run on a bit longer than they need to, and I think it's because I was definitely influenced by J.D. Salinger, a great American writer and recluse, author of Catcher in the Rye and 9 Stories and Franny and Zooey. He has a way of going on at some length, never being too worried about whether a clause goes longer than it has to. So Salinger is definitely an influence. F. Scott Fitzgerald is one as well, particularly The Great Gatsby, but his other works as well. He has this way of writing in the way that he describes once as striking a tuning fork upon a star. I mean, he just has a way with words. And John Updike, American writer, I think influenced me as well. But there are certainly others, but those 3 immediately come to mind.
Well, they're very good role models.
I like to think so.
I was interested that Simone asked the literary question in a way, rather than saying, were there any sort of filmic influences on there that you discussed with the director, sort of say, well, I'd like it to be a bit like this one or a bit like that one, or did he bring to you? And because it's such an original style, did he quote any other sort of films or filmmakers that he would be using?
I don't think so. I think he was a great admirer of Wim Wenders, who of course cast Bruno Ganz in Wings of Desire. But we actually, I don't think Anders and I ever had a conversation about directors he admired. But he definitely had ideas, and I made a few suggestions that were accepted, but it was definitely his project, and I grant all glory to him. He I think did a fantastic job.
It really is a fabulous story. It's interesting that your book, The Inextinguishable, it's not easy to say, the unpronounceable, the Inextinguishable Symphony, refers to the love story between your father and your mother. Your mother doesn't appear in the film because she's died sort of years previously. Were you aware growing up of the strength and the power of this love story that was between your parents, or was it like, oh no, it's mum and dad, I didn't really want to sort of acknowledge this great romance?
Well, I learned a lot about the characters of the two of them. My mother was a very, very fine musician, wonderful musician. But the story was that during bombing raids, and again, don't forget, they didn't get out until 1941. The war had been going on for nearly 2 years already. And they were living in a small flat on Prinzenstrasse in what is now what was East Berlin. And there was a subway stop, a tube stop not too far from their flat. And during bombing raids, they would run down the street and get into the tube stop, even though there were signs very prominently displayed, "No Jews allowed." They figured they would take their chances avoiding being hit by a bomb. But both my parents remembered my mother often saying, we will never get out of Berlin. We will never get out of Berlin. But my father was the one who would sort of buck her up and convince her that all would be well. And he was the one who stood in the very long line to get a visa. And then he was the one who went to Gestapo headquarters to get the final documents stamped. So I learned that they obviously had a very, very strong bond, that I think they both credited each other for keeping each other alive.
Mm. So much so that he, in a way, sacrificed his music career for her, let her carry on playing in St. Louis, and him becoming a salesman. You seem to be a bit angry with him about that.
Yes, it's very complex. I mean, if we had another couple of hours, and if you had a couch there I could recline on, I could tell you a lot about my relationship with my father.
Oh, it's not easy being in the Curzon living room, I tell you. You don't get away lightly.
Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, they all have their issues. My father, I think, gave up his flute when he learned of the terrible destruction of the Jews of Europe. My parents moved to St. Louis. When they first arrived in 1941, they each got jobs as musicians. My father played with the Baltimore Symphony for a while. My mom played in the Pittsburgh Symphony. They both played for one season in New Orleans, Louisiana. And then my mother auditioned for the St. Louis Symphony, the second oldest orchestra in America, and was accepted into the viola section. My father didn't even audition, because by then he had seen those first grisly newsreels coming out of Europe and what had happened to those people who had been in concentration camps. My father had learned from his father, who eventually was murdered in Auschwitz, that he was in this terrible state in various camps in France. And my father didn't manage to save his father or his brother or his mother or his sister. And I think he felt a terrible guilt for the rest of his life, which I can understand. I lost patience with him when he accepted that rather than trying to make his life a bit more rich. He sold furniture, which he hated. He never played his flute again. And I just have thought of it as an act of penance that he performed because of the loss of his family.
Yeah, well, people said that you couldn't write poetry after the Holocaust. Adorno
Right.
said that, so it may be that affects someone in a way that music becomes mute, it becomes absurd, it becomes pointless in the face of that. It's rather poetic in a way. I've just got time for one final question, which comes from Claudia Phillips from the YouTube. The book is named The Inextinguishable Symphony. Whose decision was it to name the film Winter Journey? Did you have any say in that, and why Winter Journey?
First of all, hello to cousin Claudia.
That's your cousin?
Yeah, well, not exactly. We call each other cousins. We're related on my mother's side. Her father and my mother were like second cousins or something like that. But they're
hello,
dear friends.
Claudia. I'm probably related to her as well, so hi.
It was Honor's decision. We kicked some ideas around, but I had told Honors that song cycle by Franz Schubert, Die Winterreise, The Winter Journey, was one of my father's favorite pieces of music. And he often would repeat those first two lines as Bruno Ganz does at the very beginning of the film. Fremd bin ich eingezogen, fremd bin ich wieder aus. A stranger I came, a stranger I depart. And so that was very much at the heart, I think, of my father's sense and sensibility. And when I mentioned that to Honors, he thought, well, there we go. There's the name of the film. And I thought it was wonderful how I was able to find some archive photographs, not only from many years ago, but of contemporary Arizona with snow falling off the great saguaro cacti that live outside Tucson.
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful. It was David Attenborough style kind of a documentary of that. Look, I think Winter Journey is a beautiful sentiment. I think that the quote that you did there, "A stranger I depart," as well reminds me of Kurt Weill's time in New York where he said, "I'm a stranger here myself." It gets that exiled, it gets that refugee feeling all the way. So listen, you're no stranger to us now, Martin. Thank you so much for expounding on your book and expounding on your film. It's been fascinating. As you say, I could put you on the couch and we could go deeper, but a lot longer into the film, because it's been absolutely super finding out about it. So thank you for being such a great centerpiece for Curzon Living Room, and also for the UK Jewish Film Festival. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much to you, Jason. Thanks to the Curzon people. Thanks to the UK JFF. It's really a great honor to be a part of such a wonderful festival.
So it remains for me to thank the UK Jewish Film Festival and the Association of Jewish Refugees, the Goethe Institute, and Fiona and Peter Needleman, who sponsored tonight's event. But Martin, thank you. Without you, this would be rather dull, wouldn't it? So Winter Journey is available to stream now on Curzon Home Cinema. It's also part of the UK Jewish Film Festival. We got 5 other films from that Jewish festival also playing on Curzon, including the fantastic Elsa Zilberstein in Irrepressible Woman and Golden Voices. Some very fine choices on there. If you enjoyed it, tell your friends. Tell them to watch those films. Tell them to go to ukjewishfilm.org, and there's still much more of the festival to go there. You can buy a festival pass. It's very good value to you, only $39.99. And you can follow Curzon on Facebook and Twitter to find out the upcoming events in Living Room. They go on all the time, all the more so, obviously, in this very strange situation that we're in. So I've been your host tonight, Jason Solomons. If you want to keep up with what I'm watching and with what the pros are watching, subscribe to my podcast, Seen Anything Good Lately? Lots of great Curzon recommendations on there, I can assure you. Enjoy the rest of the festival. And until I see you again, it's good night.